Okay, wow. We're really diving deep today with all this stuff about animal rights and treatment around the world.
Yeah, it's a lot to get through.
It is. It really is. You gave us quite the stack of articles and research and even religious and cultural perspectives.
Yeah, it's a real mix.
It is. It really
A
is.
real mix.
Yeah, and the mission, I guess, what we're really trying to do today is understand how different cultures, view and ultimately how they treat animals.
I think that's the core of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's going to be, I think, a fascinating look at all the different ways people think about animals.
Yeah, some of it might surprise you, I think.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Um, so before we go globetrotting, let's just take a look at how animals are used, I guess, around the world right now, kind of the state of things.
Yeah, it's not always pretty. I mean, we're talking millions of animals used in labs and the food industry and for clothing and even entertainment.
Yeah, it's a huge, huge system.
Yeah.
It really is. And I know that most of the animals used in research are like mice and rats and fish.
Yeah.
But what about some of the other species?
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are still pretty staggering. Like in the US alone, over 19,000 cats and 50,000 primates are used in labs every year.
Wow, that's hard to even imagine, and
Mhm.
that's just in the U.S.
Just in the US, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, not even taking into account the numbers from agriculture and other industries.
Yeah, right. And speaking of labs and those numbers, we can't overlook the work of Kathy Guillermo over at PETA. She's been challenging those numbers for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, she's been really strategic about it. I mean, she was part of the effort to get NASA to abandon a plan to irradiate monkeys, and she's worked with the military to stop certain training programs that used monkeys.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. What do you think it is about her approach that seems to work?
Well, she's really good at using media attention, and kind of leveraging public opinion to get institutions to change their practices.
Right. So appealing to ethics and compassion, especially when it comes to public figures, maybe that's
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it.
a big part of it. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Um, but let's wade into an even deeper discussion here. I mean, the whole question of animal rights. Like, do animals have rights? Where do we even begin with that?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? I mean, it's so thought-provoking. Like, do they have, inherent moral rights? How do we even approach that?
Well, I mean, one place to start, I guess, is with Peter Singer. I mean, his book Animal Liberation now really digs into that whole debate, and
Oh.
he introduces this idea of speciesism, which, basically says that we favor humans just because we're human, and that's a kind of prejudice.
Right. Yeah, like it's like any other form of discrimination, essentially.
Yeah, yeah, it's hard to examine those biases in yourself.
It is, yeah, and of course the counter argument is do animals actually deserve, the same rights as humans? Like is that realistic? I mean, do they need, complex language or self-awareness to be considered, morally relevant?
Right, right. That's the big question, right? But some of the research you said, it shows, I know some pretty amazing examples of animal sentience that really challenge that idea. It seems like animals might be more complex than we give them credit for sometimes.
Yeah, I mean that study with the rats was pretty mind-blowing, They would choose to help another rat who was in trouble even if it meant they wouldn't get a food reward. That's pretty amazing.
That's wild. So it's more than just instinct. There's some kind of empathy there, or
Yeah, yeah, something more going on, right? And then you have those stories, those unlikely animal friendships like, those are always heartwarming.
yeah, yeah. Like, I mean, you sent a video. I couldn't believe it. A Great Dane playing with a deer, like gently playing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that kind of throws a wrench in the whole argument that animals are just driven by basic instincts.
For sure, for sure. Those interspecies relationships are pretty amazing. But
Yeah.
okay, so let's shift gears a bit. I mean, how much do you think culture and religion impact how we view animals? I mean, this is where it gets really, really interesting, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a huge factor. You can really see how those cultural and religious values are tied to how people view and treat animals.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I mean, starting with Western culture, we tend to see like a pretty clear division between pets,
Hmm.
like companion
Yeah.
animals, and other animals like pets are protected, but other animals not so much.
Yeah, you're right. And I think the Judeo-Christian tradition has a lot to do with that, this idea of dominion over animals.
Right. Right. And even though there's this call for compassion in those texts, this whole dominion thing kind of overshadows it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point.
Yeah. But on the other hand, we have all these animal advocacy groups here in the US, like almost 50,000.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It is a lot, and they're really pushing for better legal protection,
Hmm.
for animals.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely a sign of changing values, I think.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. But if we compare that to Eastern religions like Jainism and Hinduism
Mm.
and Buddhism, it's a completely different worldview.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, they really emphasize this idea of ahimsa,
Hmm.
nonviolence, and then you have reincarnation, which adds another layer to
Right,
it.
and that's why vegetarianism is so common in those cultures.
Exactly. Yeah, and the reverence for certain animals, like in Hinduism, cows are considered sacred, and they're even protected by law. It's a pretty stark contrast to how cattle are seen in the West.
For sure, for sure. But it's important to remember that even within a religion, there can be different views. Like in Hinduism, they also have animal sacrifice in some rituals.
Right. Yeah. So it's not always, black and white. There's there's a lot of nuance there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, okay, so what about Islam? I mean, it seems like animals are there for human benefit, but there's a catch, right?
Yeah, I mean, while they do believe that animals are a resource for humans, Islam really emphasizes treating them with kindness, and cruelty is considered a sin.
Right, and there are specific rules about slaughter, right, and even
Yeah.
even about which animals you can eat, like no pork.
Right. Yeah, there are dietary laws that lay out, which animals are okay to eat and how they have to be slaughtered, and it's all about ensuring that they're treated humanely.
Okay, so kind of similar to Judaism in a way, right?
Yeah, very similar. I mean, Judaism also has a strong emphasis on treating animals humanely, even though, they do believe that animals are here for human use.
Right, and they
Yeah.
they also have specific rules for slaughter, right?
Mm.
It's called shatita.
Yeah, and that's been a point of contention. Some animal rights activists say it's cruel, but Jewish practitioners say it's the most humane way to slaughter an animal.
Yeah, so it just shows how differently people can view even practices that are meant to be humane, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's all about perspective.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Okay, let's move on to China then. I mean, historically they haven't really focused on animal welfare, have they?
No, not really, but what's interesting is that it's starting to change, especially among younger
Oh,
generation.
really? So do you think that's because of, I don't know, globalization maybe? Or Western influence?
Yeah, it's possible, but you also have to consider the influence of traditional Chinese medicine. Things like bear bile farming. That's deeply rooted in their culture, and it raises some ethical questions that are unique to China.
Yeah, it's complicated, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Um, okay, and speaking of a global perspective, we
Yeah.
can't forget about conservation. I mean, biodiversity loss, that's a global problem.
Absolutely. And finding solutions that work across different cultures. That's a real challenge.
It is, but there was this one study from Qatar. I thought this was interesting. They found that whether or not someone liked a particular animal, it was the best predictor of whether they supported protecting it. And that was true across cultures.
Yeah, that's a really interesting finding. It suggests that maybe there's some common ground there. We all have animals that we like and want to protect.
Right, but here's yeah, and we also have the Passy T Act here in the U.S., which is, I mean, that's a huge win. It criminalizes some of the worst forms of animal cruelty.
Yeah, definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah, for sure. And then of course there are state and local laws. A lot of those focus on companion animals, pets, and we're seeing more and more laws that ban using wild animals in entertainment.
Yeah, definitely. And the Animal Legal Defense Fund, they have these state rankings. It's a great way to see how your state measures up in terms of animal protection laws.
Yeah, it is. It is, and it's a good reminder that even small actions can make a difference. Like fostering animals or donating to shelters, choosing cruelty-free products, speaking up for animals. It all matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Every little bit helps.
It really does. It really does.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. I mean, we've seen how animals are used. We've talked about the ethics, the cultural and religious perspectives. I mean, it's a lot to wrap our heads around.
Yeah. It's a lot to process for sure.
It is. It really is. But the bottom line, I think, is that animal rights and how we treat animals, it's not simple. It's not black and white. Culture and religion play a huge role, personal values.
It's all intertwined.
It really is.
It is.
Yeah. So the big question is, how do we balance human needs with animal welfare in a world where everyone has such different views?
Yeah. That's the challenge.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
Yeah.
And I guess another thing to think about is as the world becomes more connected, are we going to see, I don't know, more agreement on animal rights, or are cultural differences always going to shape how we interact with animals? That's something to ponder, right?
Yeah, that's a really good question, something to think about.
Yeah. I mean, this deep dive has given us a lot to think about, and I hope our listeners, they continue exploring these issues. It's really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think education and awareness are key.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So, one thing that people can, really impact is the food they eat. We've got this article here that talks about plant-based diets becoming more and more popular and how that fits in with the whole idea of animal rights.
Yeah, you're right. It's everywhere these days. Plant-based this, plant-based that. I mean, but can you really get all the nutrients you need from plants? Is that even possible?
Yeah, that's a common question, but actually, yeah, this article lays it all out. A balanced plant-based diet can give you all the essential nutrients you need, even the ones people usually think you need meat and dairy for.
Okay, so like protein, for example, where do you get that if you're not eating a steak?
Yeah, good question. I mean, there are tons of plant-based protein sources. Tofu, lentils, beans, nuts, you name it. And for things like vitamin B12 and iron, there are fortified foods and supplements you can take.
Okay, so it's not just lettuce and carrots. There's real substance there.
Yeah, exactly. It's not about deprivation. It's about, making informed choices.
Right, right. And this article, it goes beyond just the health aspects. It talks about the ethical and the environmental implications too, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, if we all, really adopted those animal rights principles, think about how much, greenhouse gas emissions would go down and deforestation, and we could have a more sustainable, food system overall.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty compelling. It makes you think about the choices you make, how they impact the world, not just your own plate.
Exactly, it's all connected.
It really is. It really is. Okay, let's zoom in on the legal side of things here in the U.S. We have the Animal Welfare Act, but this article we have, it points out some pretty big gaps in that law.
Yeah, I mean a lot of species aren't even covered by it. Like the ones raised for food.
Really? So there's no protection for them at all?
Not under the Animal Welfare Act, no. And the crazy thing is, the law doesn't even acknowledge that animals can, feel pain. Like that's kind of a fundamental flaw.
Wow, that's pretty disheartening, to see those shortcomings in such an important law.
It is, yeah, but the article does talk about the ASPCA, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and they've done a lot of good work.
Yeah, they have. I mean, they've been around for over 150 years. They're really dedicated.
Yeah, they provide direct care to animals, and they lobby for better laws. They're really on the front lines.
Yeah, and the article says, even small things like fostering animals or teaching kids to respect animals, donating to animal charities, choosing products that aren't tested on animals, it all adds up.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Every little bit helps.
It really does. Okay, so this next article, it talks about something called cultural solipsism, which I'm not even sure what that means. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, so basically it's this tendency to only see the world through your own cultural lens, and that can make it hard to understand or appreciate other cultural viewpoints.
Okay, so how does that play into animal rights?
Well, this article looks at 5 different cultural traditions: Western, Indian, Chinese, South African, and Islamic, and it shows how how each one of those cultures kind of sees animals through their own, specific values and beliefs.
Okay, so for example, in Western culture, we tend to see pets as different from other animals. Like pets are more important; they deserve more protection.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting, to think about why that is, why we make that distinction.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And in India, like we talked about before, cows are sacred. They're protected by law.
Right, and that's because of ahimsa, that principle of nonviolence, and it shows how deeply cultural values can shape, legal systems.
It really does. It really does. Okay, so what about China? This article says that even though some religious teachings in China talk about compassion for animals,
Mm.
historically they haven't really been concerned about animal welfare.
Yeah, that's true, but things are changing. There's a growing movement there to enact laws to protect animals, and a lot of that is coming from younger people.
Okay, so maybe there's hope for change even in cultures where those traditions are so deeply ingrained.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a sign that things can shift even on issues like this.
Okay, good, good. So this article about South Africa, it asks a really interesting question. It asks if concern for animals in South Africa is just, a product of cultural colonialism, like it's being imposed by Western ideas.
Yeah, that's a really tough question to answer. Is it genuine concern, or is it just, a reflection of outside influence?
It makes you think about how cultures, interact with each other and how values are spread.
Hmm.
It's not simple.
Yeah, it's really nuanced.
It is okay, and lastly, this article about the Islamic perspective. It says that animals are there for human benefit, but they have to be treated kindly.
Right. So it's this balance between using animals and recognizing that they deserve to be treated with respect.
Yeah, so it's not just exploitation, it's more like responsible stewardship.
Exactly, and it shows that cultural views on animals, they're not always one dimensional.
Mm.
There's often this really complex mix of beliefs and practices.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not always easy to categorize these things.
Yeah, it's definitely not a one size fits all situation.
Okay, so we've seen how different cultures view animals, but how do you actually promote animal rights in a world where those views are so different? How do you bridge those gaps?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? But this article, it offers a model for global animal rights advocacy, and it takes into account, those cultural differences, but it also looks for common ground, for universal principles.
So kind of a balance between respecting those cultural differences and sticking to those basic ethical principles. How does that work in practice?
Well, they suggest that advocates should tailor their message to the specific culture they're talking to, but at the same time they should emphasize those universal principles that go beyond cultural boundaries.
Okay, so can you give us an example? Like how would that work?
Yeah, so let's take the campaign to ban bear bile farming in China. It's really important to acknowledge that bear bile has cultural significance in traditional Chinese medicine, but advocates can also say, hey, torture is wrong, and it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering on sentient beings, and that's a principle that most people can agree on, regardless of their culture.
Right. So it's kind of a multi-pronged approach. You're acknowledging the culture, but
Right.
you're also appealing to those shared values, those basic ethical principles.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about finding that sweet spot.
Yeah. Okay. And this article goes on to identify three categories of universal principles that can be really effective in animal advocacy.
Yeah, so the first category is general ethical principles that most cultures, accept, like the idea that torturing a sentient being is just wrong.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. What of the second category?
So the second category is human-centered principles, like the idea that violence against animals often leads to violence against humans.
So you're kind of appealing to the idea that human well-being and animal well-being are linked.
Yeah, exact.
Okay, and the third category.
The third category is empirical principles. So things that are based on scientific evidence and legal standards.
Okay, so those are like the facts, the hard evidence.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so it seems like these three categories give you a good framework for building, persuasive arguments for animal rights.
Yeah, I think so. It's a good starting point.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Um, okay, so let's switch gears a bit. We have this research study that looked at cross-cultural awareness and attitudes towards endangered animals. It was done in Qatar.
Yeah, that's a fascinating study. It really sheds light on how people from different backgrounds, perceive and value animals.
So how did they do this study? What did they actually do?
So they surveyed people from six different cultural groups who were living in Qatar. So you had, Weird, which is Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, and then you had Southeast Asian, Arabian Gulf, Sub-Saharan African, Middle Eastern, and North African and South Asian.
Okay, so a pretty diverse group.
Yeah, really good mix.
Yeah. Okay, and what were they trying to find out?
So they asked people about five threatened animal species that are native to the Arabian Gulf, and they asked about their familiarity with the animals, whether they like them, and whether they supported government protection for them.
Okay, so which animals were they looking at?
So they were looking at the dugong, the hawksbill sea turtle, the Arabian oryx, the Saker falcon, and the spiny-tailed agama.
Okay, so a good mix of different types of animal.
Yeah, representing different branches of the animal kingdom.
Yeah. Okay, and what did they find? Were there any big differences between the cultural groups?
Yeah, there were some interesting findings. So one thing they found was that just being familiar with an animal didn't necessarily mean that someone would support protecting it.
Really? So just knowing about it wasn't enough.
No, it wasn't. It really came down to whether or not they liked the animal. That was the biggest predictor of whether they would support, government protection measures. And that was true across all the cultural groups.
Yes. So it's more about feelings, about having a positive emotional connection with the animal.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a really important takeaway.
Okay, so liking the animal was important across the board, but did the level of liking vary between the different groups?
Yeah, so the weird participants and the Southeast Asian participants, they tended to have the most positive attitudes towards the animals, while the Arabian Gulf, Sub-Saharan African, Middle Eastern, and North African and South Asian participants, they had less favorable views.
Okay, that's interesting and kind of surprising, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And here's the really interesting part. The Arabian Gulf group, even though they live near these animals, they actually showed significantly less liking for them, and they were less likely to support government protection
Oh,
measures.
that's really unexpected. I mean, you would think that living near the animals would make you, more fond of them.
Yeah, you would think so, but it seems like it's not always the case.
Right. So familiarity doesn't always breed, fondness. It's more complicated than that.
Yeah, it seems like it, and it really shows how much culture can shape our attitudes towards wildlife.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So what does this all mean for conservationists? What can they learn from this study?
Well, the researchers suggest that focusing on liking, on positive feelings towards animals, that might be a universal way to influence conservation decisions, across cultures.
Okay, so appealing to those positive emotions, that might be the key.
Yeah, I think that's a really important takeaway.
Yeah, it's hopeful, right? It means that there's some common ground we can build on.
Yeah, definitely. But they also emphasize that we need to address those cultural biases that might get in the way of conservation efforts.
So how do you do that? How do you tackle those biases?
Well, for example, with the Arabian Gulf group, they like those animals less. So maybe educational programs that focus on empathy and understanding, maybe that could help to shift those attitudes.
So it's about finding ways to bridge those gaps between cultural perspectives and conservation goals.
Yeah, exactly. It's about finding ways to connect with people, to help them see things from a different perspective.
Okay, so it's complicated, but there's hope.
Yeah, I think there's always hope.
Good, good. Um, okay, let's go back to the legal side of things for a minute. We have this information from the Animal Legal Defense Fund about different laws that protect animals.
Yeah, they've done a lot of work on this. They really have a good grasp of the legal landscape, both at the federal level and at the state level.
Okay, so let's start with the federal level. I mean, we've already talked about the Animal Welfare Act,
Yeah.
and its limitations.
Right, yeah, it's definitely not perfect, but it does set some basic standards for how animals are treated in research and in zoos and in breeding facilities.
Mm. Okay, and then we have the PATHET Act, which is, I mean, that's a big step forward, criminalizing those really horrific acts of cruelty.
Yeah, that's a really important law. It shows that things are moving in the right direction.
Yeah, for sure. But most animal protection laws are actually at the state level, right? And
Yeah.
and those laws can be very different from state to state.
Yeah, that's true, and that's where the Animal Legal Defense Fund's rankings come in. They look at each state's laws and they rank them based on how strong those laws are.
Yeah, so that's a really useful tool, for people who want to know how their state is doing and where they might need to focus their advocacy efforts.
Exactly. It gives you a really clear picture of the legal landscape.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Okay, let's take a break from the legal stuff for a minute and talk about some of the really cool examples of animal sentience that we came across in our research.
Yeah, I mean some of those examples are just amazing. They really challenge the idea that animals are, just automatons, that they don't have feelings or empathy.
Yeah. One that really stood out to me was that study with the rats, where they had to choose between helping another rat who was in distress or getting a food reward.
Yeah, that's a classic test of altruism, and the results were really surprising. The rats consistently chose to help their companion, even though it meant, missing out on a treat.
Wow, it means they were motivated by something more than just, their own self-interest.
Yeah, exactly. It,
Okay.
it suggests that they have some capacity for empathy. That they want to help others, even if it costs them something.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then you have those stories about unlikely animal friendships. Yeah, those are always heartwarming.
Yeah, like the snake and the hamster who became best friends. That's a classic one.
That one always gets me. And the video you sent of the Great Dane playing with the deer, I mean, come on, that was amazing.
Yeah, that was pretty special, and those stories, they remind us that the animal world is full of surprises, and
Yeah.
that we don't always know what to expect. Our assumptions about animal behavior aren't always right.
Yeah, it's good to be reminded of that animals they're complex, they're more than we sometimes give them credit for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all of those examples, the anecdotes, the research, it all points to the idea that animals are sentient, that they have feelings, and that we have an ethical obligation to treat them with respect and compassion.
Yeah, it's not just about avoiding cruelty. It's about recognizing that they have value, that they have a right to a good life.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So we had this really powerful essay that argues for animal rights. It goes beyond just animal welfare. It's a more radical vision.
Yeah, it's a really interesting essay. It really digs into the philosophical foundations of animal rights, and it makes a really compelling case for extending, moral consideration to non-human animals.
Okay. So where does the author start with this?
So they start by talking about the purpose of rights, and how rights are meant to protect the fundamental interests of individuals.
Okay. So rights are not just legal things. They're about protecting someone's well-being.
Exactly. Yeah, and the author argues that sentient animals, because they can, experience pain and suffering, they have interests that we need to consider morally.
Yeah.
They're not just objects or property. They're
Hmm.
beings with inherent worth.
Okay, so that challenges the idea that only humans have moral value, that humans are the only ones that really matter.
Yeah, exactly. It's a challenge to that anthropocentric worldview.
Yeah, for sure. And how does the author build on that idea?
So they talk about torture, and how it's inherently wrong to torture anyone, regardless of their species. It's a basic moral principle.
Right. So it's not okay to torture a human, and it's not okay to torture an animal.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about recognizing that sentience, the ability to feel pain and suffer. That's what matters.
Yeah. Okay. And the author, they also criticize those animal protection laws that just regulate how animals are used. They say that's not enough.
Right. Yeah. They argue that those laws actually just perpetuate the idea that animals are resources for us to use, instead of recognizing that they have their own value, their own inherent rights.
Okay, so it's not just about regulating how we use animals.
Yeah.
It's about respecting their right to not be used at all.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the core of their argument.
Yeah. Okay. And how does the essay end? What's the conclusion?
So they end by making a really, really strong case for giving animals basic rights, rights to life, rights to well-being, protection from unnecessary suffering, freedom from exploitation, and the ability to live a life that's natural for their species.
So it's a vision of a world where animals are no longer seen as property, but as individuals who deserve to be treated with respect and compassion.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the kind of world they're envisioning.
Yeah, and it's a world that requires us to really change the way we think about animals, and our relationship with them.
Yeah, for sure. It's a big challenge, but I think it's a challenge that we need to face.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Okay, so let's switch gears again and talk about the use of animals in scientific research. That's a topic that always sparks a lot of debate.
Yeah, it's a really sensitive issue, and the three R's, those principles we talked about before, replacement, reduction, and refinement, those are really important in this. Yeah, they've been doing this work since 1926. I mean, they've really made a big difference in the lives of animals who are used in research.
Yeah, they've really been pioneers in promoting those three R's, and now those principles are pretty widely accepted, as the guidelines for ethical animal research.
Yeah, it's a testament to their work. Their advocacy has really paid off.
Yeah, for sure. And just to remind our listeners, the three R's stand for replacement, which means finding ways to avoid using animals altogether. Using other methods if possible.
Right, and then reduction, which means using the fewest animals possible. Designing experiments so that you get the most information you can from the smallest number of animals.
Okay, and refinement, which means finding ways to make the lives of the animals who are used in research, as good as possible, like giving them more enriching environments, minimizing pain and distress.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about making sure that the animals are treated as humanely as possible.
Yeah, and UFAW, they don't just promote these principles. They also fund research that looks at animal welfare. And they provide training to researchers and animal care staff.
Yeah, they do a lot of great work. They really take a holistic approach to this issue.
Yeah, for sure, for sure, and they've really helped to reduce the suffering of a lot of animals who are used in research.
Yeah, definitely. They've made a big difference.
Okay, so let's talk about some specific examples of how those three R's are being used in real life.
Hmm. Okay, so a good example is the LB50 test. That was a test that was used to figure out how toxic a substance was.
Yeah, I remember reading about that. That was a really nasty test. They basically gave animals, increasing doses of a substance until half of them die.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal, and it caused a lot of suffering.
And thankfully, organizations like UFAW, they fought really hard against that test,
Yeah.
and now it's almost never used.
Yeah, it's a good example of how advocacy can really make a difference.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And now they use more refined methods
Yeah.
that don't use as many animals and that cause less pain.
Right. So that's a good example of reduction and refinement in action.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Another example of refinement is environmental enrichment for lab animals, giving them more stimulating environments, more natural environments.
Yeah. So instead of just being in a barren cage, they have things to interact with, things to keep their minds active.
Right. So it's recognizing that they're more than just, research subjects. They're living beings with needs.
Exactly. Yeah. And UFAW they continue to push for more progress in implementing the 3 Rs. They believe that we can always do better, that we can always find ways to reduce the number of animals used in research, and to make sure that those who are used are treated as humanely as possible.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's an ongoing process, but it's good to know that there are organizations out there that are really fighting for these animals.
Yeah, definitely. They're doing important work.
Okay, so let's talk about religion now. I mean, religion plays a big role in how people view animals, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our beliefs about the world, our values, those are deeply intertwined with our ethical values on how animals should be treated.
Right, and we have this article here that kind of gives an overview of what different religions have to say about our obligations towards animals. It's a really interesting look at the different perspectives.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see the range of views. It's a really diverse tapestry.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So let's start with Christianity. I mean, that's a complex one, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you have some Christians who focus on the biblical passage that talks about humans having dominion over animals, and they use that to justify using animals for human purposes.
Right, but then you have other Christians who emphasize, compassion and stewardship. They say that we have a moral duty to treat animals kindly.
Yeah, exactly. So it's this ongoing debate within Christianity about how to interpret those teachings, and it reflects this bigger tension, between anthropocentrism, the idea that humans are at the center of everything, and the idea that all living things have value.
Right, and that's a tension that we see in a lot of different cultures and religions.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so what about Hinduism? What do they say about animals?
So Hinduism really emphasizes this idea of ahimsa, nonviolence, and that
Yeah.
that includes animals. So a lot of Hindus are vegetarian.
Right, but they also have animal sacrifice in some of their rituals, right?
Yeah, they do,
Yeah.
which creates this kind of complicated ethical situation. It shows that even within one religion there can be different views on how animals should be treated.
Yeah, it's not always, clear cut. There's a lot of nuance there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so what about Islam? How do they view animals?
So in Islam, animals are seen as being there for the benefit of humans, but there's this really important emphasis on treating them kindly.
Right. So it's not just about using them. It's about treating them well.
Yeah, cruelty towards animals is considered a sin in Islam, and they have specific rules about how animals should be slaughtered, and even about which animals you can eat.
Right. So there's this idea of respect. Even if you're using animals for food.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about recognizing that they're living beings, and that they deserve to be treated humanely.
Okay. And Judaism, they have a similar view, right?
Yeah, very similar. I mean, they also emphasize humane treatment, and
Yeah.
and they have specific rules for slaughter as well.
Right. They have that method called shechita, which we talked about before, and that's been kind of controversial, right?
Yeah, some animal rights activists say that it's cruel, but Jewish practitioners say that it's actually the most humane method.
Yeah, so it just shows how even practices that are meant to be humane can be seen differently,
Yeah.
depending on your perspective.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all about perspective.
Okay, let's talk about PETA for a minute. I mean, they're a pretty big name in the animal rights world.
Yeah, they're definitely one of the most well-known animal rights organizations, and they've been very effective in raising awareness about animal issues.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they're known for their pretty bold tactics. They're not afraid to be controversial.
Yeah, they're definitely not afraid to make a statement, and I think that's part of what's made them so successful. They've really gotten people talking about these issues.
Yeah, and they really believe that animals have a right to live free from suffering and exploitation. They see all sentient beings as deserving of moral consideration, regardless of their species.
Yeah, that's their core belief, and they
Yeah.
they really push for a vegan lifestyle. They say that's the most ethical way to live in a world where animals are treated the way they are.
Right. And Ingrid Newkirk, the founder of PETA, she has that famous quote. She said, "When it comes to pain, love, joy, loneliness, and fear, a rat is a pig, as a dog is a boy."
Yeah, that's a really powerful quote. It really gets to the heart of their philosophy, that all sentient beings are capable of experiencing those same emotions.
Yeah, for sure. And they've done a lot of good work. They've exposed a lot of the cruelty that goes on in factory farms and labs and the entertainment industry. They've pushed for changes in corporate policies and public attitudes.
Yeah, they've been a real force for change, and they continue to be a leading voice in the animal rights movement.
Okay, so let's go back to that fundamental question about animal rights. Do animals have moral rights? We've talked about it a bit, but we have this article that really makes a strong argument for recognizing those rights.
Yeah, it's a really well-reasoned argument. It really lays out the case for why animals deserve those rights.
And their argument is that the same justification that we use for human rights, that applies to animals as well, right?
You're right. So if humans are deserving of rights, then animals should be too.
Okay, so does that mean that animals should have all the same rights as humans?
Well, not necessarily. The author acknowledges that the specific rights that animals are entitled to, those would depend on their needs and their interests, which vary from species to species.
Right. So a right to life, yes, but a right to vote, probably not.
Yeah, exactly. It's about recognizing their inherent worth, but also recognizing that they're different from humans. They have different needs and different interests.
Right. And the author says that it's not fair to deny animals moral consideration just because they don't have certain abilities that humans have, like language or self-awareness.
Right. I mean, we don't deny rights to humans who lack certain cognitive abilities, like infants or people with disabilities. So why should we do that to animals?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's inconsistent, right?
Exactly. And the author argues that sentience, the ability to feel pain and suffer, that should be the basis for moral consideration.
Okay, so if an animal can suffer, then we need to take that into account. We need to treat them with respect.
Yeah, exactly. That's the idea.
Okay, and the author, they conclude by saying that if we really recognize animals as rights holders, that would require us to completely change how we think about animals, and our relationship with them.
Yeah, it would be a really fundamental shift. We would have to stop seeing them as resources and start seeing them as fellow beings who deserve our respect and our compassion.
Yeah, so it's a big challenge, but it's a vision of a better world, more just world, a more compassionate world.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a goal worth striving for.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so let's shift gears again and talk about about cultural biases. How those biases can affect how we see animals and how we understand their abilities.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. We often look at animals through our own cultural lens, and that can lead to misunderstandings, and misinterpretations.
Right, and we have this article that uses a few case studies to show how different cultures view animals and their abilities. And one example that really stood out to me was about the Crow tribe, the Native American tribe and their relationship with horses.
Yeah, the Crow people, they have a deep respect for horses. They see them as partners, as spiritual beings, and they believe that horses have intelligence and wisdom.
Right, but non-Native Americans, they often misunderstand how the Crow people treat their horses. They accuse them of neglecting them.
Yeah, like the practice of letting horses winter out, without giving them shelter or extra
Mhm.
food. That's something that a lot of people who aren't familiar with the Crow culture, they see that as cruel.
Right, but the Crow people, they understand that horses are capable of surviving those harsh winter conditions. They've adapted to finding food and shelter on their own, and the Crow people see that as a sign of the horse's intelligence and resilience.
Yeah, so it's a perfect example of how cultural differences can lead to different interpretations of what good care means.
Right. So what one culture sees as neglect, another culture sees as respect, and understanding.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a good reminder that we need to be careful about imposing our own cultural assumptions on other people.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And this article also it talks about the relationships between humans and animals in the context of sharecropping in the American South.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting case study because it kind of looks at the darker side of those relationships. The author observes that sharecroppers often treated their mules really cruelly.
And they suggest that maybe that cruelty was because of the sharecroppers' own difficult living conditions, and maybe because they kind of identified with the mules. They saw themselves in those animals.
Yeah, it's a complex psychological thing. Maybe they were projecting their own suffering onto the animals. It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah, but the article also it recognizes that sometimes cruelty is just it's just cruelty. It's a lack of empathy, a failure to see animals as beings who can feel pain and suffer.
Yeah, that's true. And I think it's important to remember that human animal relationships are complex. There are a lot of different factors that can influence how we treat animals, our culture, our economic situation, our own personality. It all plays a role.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And the article it ends by saying that we need to focus on promoting empathy and understanding, in our relationships with animals.
Yeah, it's about seeing them as sentient beings, as individuals who deserve our compassion.
Right, and that's a message that really resonates with the whole animal rights movement. It's about seeing animals as more than just objects or commodities. It's about seeing them as beings who deserve our respect.
Yeah. Exactly. I
Uh,
think I think that's a really important message to take away from all of this.
yeah, I agree. I agree. So we've covered a lot of ground today. I mean, we've talked about the science, the ethics, the law, the culture, the religion. I mean, it's a lot to process.
Yeah, it's a really complex issue, but I think it's an important one. It's something that we all need to be thinking about.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I hope our listeners, they've learned something from this deep dive, and I hope it's inspired them to learn more and to get involved. To make a difference for animals.
Yeah, I agree. I think education and awareness are key. The more we understand about animals and the issues that they face, the better equipped we'll be to help them.
Yeah, and it's about making conscious choices, in our everyday lives, thinking about the impact that our choices have on animals, whether it's the food we eat, the products we buy, the way we vote. it all matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Every little bit helps.
It really does. Really does.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive. And we hope you found it informative and thought provoking, and we hope you'll continue to explore these issues.
Yeah, and if you're feeling overwhelmed, don't worry. You don't have to do everything at once. Just start small. Pick one thing that you can change in your life and go from there.
Yeah, that's great advice. Just one step at a time.
Yeah, and remember, every step we take, every choice we make, it brings us closer to a world where animals are treated with the respect and the compassion that they deserve.
I think that's a great way to end this deep dive. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in making the world a better place for animals.
And for everyone.
Yeah,
Wow.
for everyone.